In your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here, and they expect to do it during the next campaign.
Well, that was former special counsel Robert Mueller speaking this week about the threat of Russian election interference. His testimony was echoed by a bipartisan Senate report ahead of 2020. According to the Senate Intelligence Committee, Russia targeted election systems in all 50 states. In 2016, a portion of the report reads, the Russian government directed extensive activity against U.S. election infrastructure at the state and local level. It goes on to say, while the committee does not know with confidence what Moscow's intentions were, Russia may have been probing vulnerabilities in voting systems to exploit later. The report also says there was no evidence any votes were changed. Well, the committee noted that great strides have been made to help make election officials at state and local levels aware, but efforts at the federal level to secure elections have been tougher to enact. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell stopped 2 bills addressing election security on the same day the intelligence report was released. He dismissed the moves as partisan legislation. Ted Harrington joins us now from Denver. He's an executive partner at Independent Security Evaluators, and he joins us now. So, Ted, what were your real big takeaways? You work in this industry. What did you take from that Senate Intel report?
Several things. One piece of good news is that it has confirmed that most likely no vote data was changed. So if you voted for a Democratic candidate, it didn't switch to a Republican candidate. And that seems to be one of the common fears that the average American might have about this story. But the really powerful unspoken part to this is that at its core, this is a national security issue. In many ways, this is being framed as elections being a states' rights issue. But no, this is absolutely a coordinated, well-resourced attack that can really only be considered an act of war. And we need to think about it in those terms.
You know, it's so hard for folks not to understand why this is considered warfare. While physically nobody went in and hacked actual voting sites per se, we do know, according to this report, that the cyber actors were able to delete or change voter information. So how concerning is that, and how does the U.S. respond to something with elections roughly 8 months away?
Yeah, one of the key interesting things that comes out of this is that it's really not just about changing vote data. It's not about changing who you voted for from one candidate to another. It's about changing outcomes. And the entire infrastructure of how the election system works has many moving pieces, many parties involved, many different organizations have access to different types of information. And if any of that can be compromised in any particular way, then what we would be talking about is changing of the outcome, which is who do we democratically elect for given positions? And that is a significant issue.
Senator McConnell said part of the reason that he blocked the security bills was because Congress has approved giving states funding to update their election systems. One of the bills that was blocked Thursday proposed requiring paper ballots to be used during elections. I'm curious, Ted, if you were in charge of securing the ballot box as best as you could, what would your recommendation be?
A combination of the two. Definitely having a paper backup, a paper trail to be able to audit against is a recommended and very powerful technique that we should be considering in the election system.
So what would you say the U.S. needs to do to safeguard elections?
I'd say it breaks down into 2 primary categories. Number 1 is partner, and number 2 is seek excellence. So the idea of partnering is taking head on this fallacy that exists that's known as security through obscurity. And that's the idea that secrecy alone will keep our systems secure. And unfortunately, there is not enough effective type of partnering going on between government and private industry, leveraging the extensive amount of expertise that security consultants, security researchers, security experts have who might not work in the government, but could very much help the government. So partner would be the first thing. And number 2, on compliance. So the key here is to actually assess these systems, to find the flaws, to actually try to fix them. And this is where the U.S. government can really help foster that collaboration by freeing up funding to actually protect our election security and avoid the idea of just feeling like we're compliant.
When you talk about cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns online are a big issue. We know it's not just Russia trying to interfere with American voters. What can the government and the private sector, as you mentioned, do to stop these efforts from influencing the 2020 election?
One thing that's really interesting about these disinformation campaigns is it really highlights how much technology has changed our society and how much we've really come to rely on and trust technology in ways that in years past maybe we hadn't. And so in the 2016 election, the American populace was highly susceptible to being influenced by articles or headlines that they might see through social media. This, of course, has raised a tremendous national discussion, and the hope is that as we move into future election cycles, people will be more cognizant of that. And rather than trusting a headline or some article they might see, say, on their Facebook feed, instead, go become an informed voter. Go study the issue that you care about. Read directly from the source. Go to the candidate's website. Don't just read an article from some blog you've never heard about that supposedly analyzes what that candidate has to say.
Ted Harrington, thanks so much for joining us, Ted.
Thank you for having me.